Hey, what's going on, guys? This is AndrewChicken, and welcome back to another video. Deadlock is a pretty complicated game, and as a new player, it can be difficult to understand what you need to do in order to scale your damage up from almost nothing in the early game to a powerhouse in the late game. Oh my goodness. So in this video, I want to cover the basics of how to scale up your weapon damage, spirit damage, both burst damage and damage over time, as well as your melee damage. Now, this is not an advanced guide, and we will not be covering some situational upgrades and ways to scale your damage on specific heroes. This is really just to give you a foundation so you can experiment for yourself on whatever character is your favorite to try and make their damage as powerful as possible. I also have more beginner-oriented guides in a playlist linked in the description, so go check that out if you're curious. And also, if you find this video to be helpful, then please make sure to drop a like and subscribe because it really helps out a ton. But without further ado, let's get straight into the video. So up first, let's talk about weapon damage, which is a very common and very powerful type of damage. And it's referring to damage that comes from your gun when you shoot, just like this, but it also refers to some abilities that scale their damage based on your weapon, such as Hayes' Bullet Dance, which fires your weapon at nearby enemies like this. So this ability is affected by weapon damage. Now let's talk about how you get more gun damage. Every character starts with a base weapon damage value that determines how other multipliers will affect their overall damage output. So Hayes here, for example, has a starting value of about 5 to 6 damage per bullet, and it escalates with her fixation passive. But she can get more base weapon damage from her boons. You see, when every character levels up by accruing souls throughout the match, they will gain some stat increases, including a base bullet damage increase, base melee damage increase, spirit power increase, and base health increase. Now, these boons pretty much just escalate all of your damage that you're doing throughout the match, regardless of what type of damage it is. So the higher level you are and the more souls that you have, the more damage you will do. Now, to augment this damage further, you're going to need to improve your weapon in one of three major ways. The first major way is to improve the actual raw weapon damage that you're dealing, and there are a number of items in the weapon category that do that. For example, Restorative Shot grants 8% additional weapon damage. That's fantastic. And when we buy this item here, you'll also notice on the bottom left of the screen over here that our weapon investment has just gone up. Whenever you spend souls on items in the weapon category, your weapon investment will increase, and it will also improve the damage that you deal. So because I invested 800 souls into Restorative Shot, I gained a further 7% increased weapon damage, and this will scale all the way up to a maximum of 93% increased weapon damage for investing 28.8 thousand souls into the weapon category. There are multitudes more items in the weapon category that grant additional weapon damage, and a lot of them are conditional. For example, Intensifying Magazine will grant you up to 45% max weapon damage, but it ramps up as you continuously fire your weapon, so it doesn't all come online right away. Or you could go for Berserker, which allows you to deal up to 70% more weapon damage, but you have to take sustained damage in order to ramp those stacks of damage up. Whichever damage items you choose depends on the character you're playing. For example, if you're playing a tank who wants to rush in and be in the front line and sustain a bunch of damage, you'll probably want to get Berserker. If you intend on playing up close, Point Blank could be great, but if you're playing Vindicta and want to shoot from far away, then you'll definitely want to pick up Sharpshooter, which allows you to deal more damage when beyond a minimum distance from your target. So you really want to read through each item carefully and determine what is best for the specific character you're playing. The second major way that you can improve your weapon damage is to boost its fire rate. There are a multitude of items in the item shop that give you additional fire rate, but two of the most popular are Swift Striker, which gives you 18% fire rate for pretty cheap, and Burst Fire, which gives you 10% passive fire rate and also temporarily gives you an additional 35% fire rate when you hit an enemy hero. But of course, if you stack up a bunch of fire rate, then you'll notice that you run out of ammo really quickly and you spend more time reloading than you do shooting. That is a problem. So you'll need to improve your ammo economy if you choose to build for a lot of fire rate, and there are a couple of methods for doing that. Titanic Magazine is fantastic because it gives you 90% additional ammo, almost double the ammo capacity. It may not seem like a big DPS increase, but I assure you it is, because you spend much less time reloading. Look at all that extra damage we're able to do to the target before I have to reload, so that is pretty insane. Or you can go for Active Reload, which allows you to basically finish your reload early and also gain a fire rate and bullet lifesteal buff. So I can finish the reload early by pressing R when it goes into the green space, and then boom, I reload much faster and I get back to shooting. Or we can go for Quicksilver Reload, which is actually a spirit item. We can imbue this onto an ability. In Haze's case, we definitely want to imbue that on the Sleep Dagger. And whenever we use that ability, we will instantly reload and gain a fire rate bonus. And it'll also make that ability do 60 additional spirit damage. So I can just shoot this guy a bunch, and then when I'm low on ammo, throw out the dagger, and I instantly reload. And that is a major damage output increase. The final major way that you can improve your gun DPS is to reduce the enemy's bullet resistance, and there are many methods for doing this. For example, we could buy Weakening Headshot, which makes it so that we reduce the enemy's bullet resist by 12% for 10 seconds when we land a headshot on them. This is pretty powerful, because if their starting resistance is 0%, then we reduce it by minus 12%, that's effectively a 12% damage multiplier. So all the damage calculations that we do to improve our weapon damage from stuff like weapon investment, plus our fire rate, will basically all just be dealing 12% more damage to the enemy on top of that. So it is a really powerful source of extra damage. As you can clearly see, we're doing a lot more damage to this target now with our bullets because we hit this guy in the head. And there are a bunch of other options for reducing the enemy's resistances, including Hunter's Aura, Hollow Point, Crippling Headshot. You can also go for armor-piercing rounds to completely avoid the enemy's bullet resistance, and I usually would recommend this if they have overwhelmingly high resistances. For example, Yamato during her ult has about 60% resistances, so does Viscus during his Goo Ball, and those are just flat values before they buy armor on top of that. So if their resistances are super duper high, this is a better call, but if their resistances aren't that high, then you have a better chance of getting them into the negatives with something like Weakening Headshot. Now, one other source of increased weapon damage and fire rate comes from these golden statues, which have a chance to drop a buff that will give you increased weapon damage. This one gives max ammo, and if we just keep rolling through these, we will eventually get some fire rate and some weapon damage. Ah, there we go, just like that. 4% weapon damage and 2% fire rate. So we can pick these up, and that will also permanently increase our weapon damage and fire rate. So as you're roaming throughout the Deadlock map, you want to make sure you're breaking these urns whenever possible, because they'll provide you a bunch of small increases that add up to a major DPS increase. And you can also get these golden statue buffs from the Sinner's Sacrifices. So just heavy melee it 4 times like this, and then watch the lights on the very top of it. Once they get all the way to the end, you want to make sure to heavy melee it, and you will get 3 buffs. And right there, I just got 2% extra fire rate, so that is very helpful. And you want to make sure to heavy melee it and not light melee it. Yes, you can technically light melee the Sinner's Sacrifice, but you only get 1 buff out of it. If you heavy melee it with the right timing, you get 3. So, very important that you heavy melee it. Light melee is just wasting a bunch of extra buffs. So, let's run through a hypothetical. How would I increase my gun damage to an utterly extreme degree on Haze? Well, I would want to build for a bit of all 3 of the major damage increases. I would want to increase my fire rate, my overall weapon damage, and I would want to reduce the enemy's resistances while maintaining my ammo economy, so I am just able to keep shooting them continuously without having to reload. So I'm going to pick up Swift Striker and Titanic Magazine. Both of these are a great combo for your early game weapon damage, and we can also grab Burst Fire for even more fire rate, and this is already looking pretty nice. And I'm going to go ahead and max level myself just so we can have a higher starting value for our bullets, make sure that we, are getting all our boons and all our souls just fine. And then we can lower their resistances with Weakening Headshot and potentially Crippling Headshot. This is a very nice DPS increase, especially against armored targets. And then we can also go for Glass Cannon, which gives us 80% increased weapon damage, as well as a stacking fire rate buff per kill. This is a very risky item to go for because of its max health penalty, but it is very powerful, and so if you plan on building around it, it can be very valuable. But if you don't want to take the risk, then you could go for a safer tier 4 like Lucky Shot, which causes your bullets to have a chance to do way more weapon damage. But as you can see, we've increased our weapon damage, we've increased our fire rate, and we've reduced the enemy's resistances. And now, yeah, we're doing pretty good gun damage, and in just that amount of time, I have already taken out pretty much my entire health pool from this guy's health pool. I've done that much damage that quickly, so that is very nice, and that's without upgrading Fixation or anything. And we can just continue to go even further. We can pick up Vampiric Burst, which is a good sustain item. You'll definitely want to pick up some Lifesteal if you're playing a gun build, and this, when activated, gives us 80% Lifesteal plus 40% fire rate, so we can really just hammer this guy home. and yeah, we just do a ton of damage. There are also some miscellaneous items that can help you with your gun builds. For example, siphon bullets will allow you to steal health from the enemies with your bullets, making it a very powerful vitality item for gun builds, and it also gives you 15% weapon damage on top of that, so this is a very good option. You'll also want to look out for anyone on your team buying healing tempo. A lot of support-based characters like Dynamo and McGinnis will buy this item, and when they do, if they heal a teammate, they will grant them a 40% fire rate increase. So if you see McGinnis pick this up, stand in her healing specter and it will give you a massive DPS increase. And it would be remiss of me not to talk about Mercurial Magnum. This is a very powerful item that upgrades from Quicksilver Reload. Whenever you use the imbued ability, not only will you gain the bonus damage, fire rate, and reload, but you will also gain a base bullet damage increase in the form of additional spirit damage whenever you shoot your weapon. So if I imbue this onto Sleep Dagger and then sleep this guy, you see that now I'm doing spirit damage alongside my base bullet damage. And this scales based off of your base bullet damage. So that's your bullet damage before you actually factor in like your weapon damage increases from weapon investment and stuff like that. So it's not actually as good on Haze as it is on someone else like Wraith, but it can be a major damage increase, especially if you're already scaling a bit of spirit power too. Speaking of spirit power, let's talk about how you can scale your spirit damage. So all spirit builds scale their damage based on spirit power, which comes from items in the spirit category. So if I buy improved spirit, for example, I will get 18 spirit power, and that will translate into more damage on my abilities. So if I hover over the flog and then hold left alt, I'll be able to see how this spirit power is affecting my ability. So if you look at the damage calculation up there, you see how it has that little purple star? That means it's affected by spirit power. So I am getting 1.1 damage for every 1 spirit power that I put into this ability. And the amount of damage that you get per spirit power varies based on the hero and the specific ability. So if I look at my ground strike, I'm only getting 0.8 damage on it per 1 spirit power. But still, the spirit power is giving me 26 extra damage on this ability. So no matter what spirit build you're playing, whether it's a burst build or a DOT build, having more spirit power is a very good thing. And whenever you buy a spirit item, you will also gain spirit power from investment, similar to our weapon damage from investment. So because I bought improved spirit here for 1600 souls, I now gain 11 extra spirit power, and this goes up to a max of 81 extra spirit power at 28.8k invested. Now our spirit damage scaling depends on whether you're playing a burst build or a damage over time build, because some characters hit with one giant big burst of spirit damage, like Lash here, who hits this ground strike and does a bunch of damage all in one go. But you could also be playing a character like Seven, who does a lot of damage over time. He puts the lightning ball down, and it ticks up a ton of damage over time, a bunch of small instances of damage rapidly afflicting the target. And he does this with all of his abilities, the Power Surge and the Ultimate. So first I'm going to cover burst damage, and then I'm going to talk about damage over time and how it differs from burst damage. So let's talk about how to scale up a character like Lash. So immediately you'll want to think about the item Mystic Burst, which charges up over time with bonus spirit damage, causing abilities dealing more than 80 damage to deal additional damage. So if we deal more than 80 damage in one go, we will get 40 extra damage. And the way this charge up over time mechanic works is that if we hit someone with it at full charge, we will get that plus 40 damage. Look at the outgoing damage, we get that 40 damage from Mystic Burst, no problem. But if it's only half charged, I don't get the full 40 damage. Instead, we only got 25 damage from that second ground strike. So it will always add some amount of extra damage, but that damage will vary based on whether it's fully charged or not. And the upgraded version of Mystic Burst is very powerful indeed. Tank Buster is basically the same as Mystic Burst, but it only works on abilities that deal more than 165 damage. And not only do you get that bonus 40 damage, but you also gain 6% of the enemy's max health as bonus damage. This is especially powerful versus targets that are building for a lot of vitality items and are generally really tanky, like Mo and Krill. So now if we grab this, you can see that our next ground strike does way more damage, and that's because we got 220 damage from Tank Buster because this test dummy here has so much extra health. So this gets better the later on into the match you are, because the more HP the enemies have. It is a very powerful burst tool when used effectively on a character like Lash. And while you might think Quicksilver Reload is only an item that's good for gun builds, it's actually very useful for spirit builds too when they're doing burst damage like Lash, because of this 60 damage that it adds. It charges up very similarly to Mystic Burst, but it doesn't have that initial damage requirement. You can just slap this on an ability like Flog, for example, and now if I flog this guy, whoopsh, you see that. Well, okay, I got 220 damage from Tank Buster, I got 184 from the base Flog, and then I got an additional 60 from Quicksilver Reload. So Quicksilver Reload is about a third of the base damage of Flog. Not bad at all. And especially in the early game, this can be very helpful for the utility it brings with the fire rate and the bullets reloaded as well. And on a character like Moe and Krill, who heals based off the damage he does with Scorn, it's even better. Another excellent tool for doing more burst damage is Mystic Reverb. Now this imbues an ability to apply a slow on a hit target and deal an additional percentage of the damage dealt to enemies around the target after a short delay. So this is basically a 50% damage amp. Whatever damage you're doing, from Tank Buster, Quicksilver Reload, etc., all of that, if it's delivered in one burst of damage, will be multiplied by an additional 50%. So, if I just go ahead and imbue this on my Flog and then whip this guy, we get 486 damage there, and then we're going to see that we get 243 extra damage after a short delay. So if we look at our outgoing damage here, 243 of that came from Mystic Reverb. It's actually the highest single instance of damage here. It's basically taking all the damage that we did in one instance from Tank Buster, Flog, and Quicksilver Reload at the same time, and then adding 50% on top of that. And on some characters like Bomb Bebop and Bomb Lady Geist, Echo Shard is another fantastic ability because it effectively doubles your damage. This will reset the cooldown of the imbued non-ultimate ability when you use it. So if I imbue this on Flog, I can whip this guy, then I can Echo Shard, and then whip him again. That adds another 253 damage, and then the Mystic Reverb comes in with 250. So 2 hits of Flog does 437 damage, Mystic Reverb does 250, Tank Buster does 249, and then Quicksilver Reload does 65. So that's another way to really escalate your damage. But one thing to note with the Echo Shard is that the second instance of damage will get almost no benefit from either Tank Buster or Quicksilver Reload. As a matter of fact, you can see from Quicksilver Reload here, it only got 5 additional damage on the second whip, and that's because they didn't have enough time to charge before I used the Echo Shard. So that's one thing to keep in mind. The damage on the second hit will probably be a little bit weaker, but again, on a character like Bomb Bebop, it is still very powerful. One last way to improve your damage output with burst characters is to reduce their cooldowns. Because they do all of their damage in one big burst just like this, they're kinda useless once their cooldowns are active and they don't have their abilities ready to go. So by lowering the cooldown of their abilities, you therefore increase the consistency of the character as the match goes on, allowing them to hit those bursts more frequently. So do not skip out on superior cooldown if you are playing a character like Lash. It is very, very helpful, not just for his damage, but also for his utility with the ultimate. Wha-bam! Wha-bam! And we get to do that much faster. And of course, the same goes for range. You want to make sure that your bombs and your slams and all of that are hitting as many enemies as possible and not missing the intended target. And so, if you're struggling to land those abilities, these can also help make them more consistent. You need your abilities to land and as frequently as possible. These items help with that. Now let's talk about spirit damage over time, which is scaled up in a very different fashion to burst damage. And so there are a couple of methods that you can use to improve your damage over time. First of all, let's talk about spirit damage reduction. This is much more impactful on a character that does damage over time because of the weird way that some spirit damage reduction is applied. So Mystic Vulnerability is a very common method of reducing the target's spirit resist, but it has a very interesting interaction. So if I buy this, and then I go ahead and use Power Surge and shoot this guy once, it does 46 damage, but then the next shot does 55 damage. So the reason why this is because the first shot applies the Mystic Vulnerability, but it isn't affected by the Mystic Vulnerability. So only the shots that happen after are the ones that are affected by Mystic Vulnerability. So if you're playing a burst character like Lash, for example, and you go ahead and slam a target, Mystic Vulnerability will now be applied to the target, but it won't affect your slam, and so that's why you don't usually see that on Lash. Now, if a burst character wants to reduce somebody's spirit damage reduction, they can still buy something like Spirit Shredder bullets, which reduces their spirit resist when you shoot them. So you can shoot them, and then you can apply your spirit damage, and it will be amplified because of that Spirit Shred. But yeah, if you're gonna use Mystic Vulnerability, it had better be on a character that builds for damage over time. The game kind of hints towards that anyways, though, because Mystic Vulnerability upgrades into Escalating Exposure, which is a very powerful stacking damage amplifier that is most consistent on damage over time builds, because you have to consistently hit the enemies over and over to apply it up to max stacks. Basically, every 0.7 seconds, if a target gets hit by your spirit damage, you will apply a stacking spirit amp that increases your spirit damage up to a maximum of 12 stacks. So I can buy this, and then I can just like chuck a lightning ball at this guy, and you can see the Escalating Exposure go to work. And it is gradually increasing the damage per tick that I'm doing to the target, and this affects all my damage. So my Power Surge is doing more damage, and now that we're at max stacks, my ultimate's gonna do crazy amounts of damage. Another great way to improve your damage over time is to increase the duration of your abilities. So an item like Duration Extender or Superior Duration is excellent on someone like Seven or Infernus or Ivy or anyone who's trying to play a spirit build where you've got spirit damage over time effects that are lingering around trying to harass the enemies. So my Superior Duration is going to make my Lightning Ball last longer, it's going to make my Power Surge last longer, it's also going to affect my Stun, which is a nice side effect, but it's also, of course, going to affect my ultimate. Now that's pretty darn powerful, having extra duration on this thing, holy crap. Overall, I would say scaling spirit damage over time is much simpler than scaling burst damage, and it's a lot easier to get value out of, because in many cases, like on 7 or Infernus, it's almost like playing for a gun build, you know? You use Power Surge on 7, you hit this guy consistently with damage over time, it's very powerful. Throw a Lightning Ball out, it's damage over time. It's very quick, clean, and easy. One last thing that can be great for damage over time in the case of someone like 7 who wants people to stay in his ultimate, or Ivy who wants people to stay in her kudzu, is to go for Mystic Slow, which slows down the enemies whenever they take spear damage. So I can grab this, and then I can head on over to this guy over here who's walking, and if I just hit him with a lightning ball, he's gonna stay in that lightning ball for longer because he's moving slower. So it's another very good way to improve the consistency of your damage. Finally, let's talk about melee damage. There are a couple of ways to scale up your light melees and your heavy melees to do significantly more damage, and it's very effective on a character like Abrams. So, there are 3 major items that affect melee that upgrade into more powerful versions later in the game. In the weapon category, we have Melee Charge, which upgrades into Crushing Fists. Melee Charge is a very good item because it improves your heavy melee distance, which makes it more consistent to land, and it also boosts your raw melee damage with that 10% amp, and every 7 seconds, your next heavy melee attack will deal a further 25% bonus damage. So I can buy this, and my heavy melee is already hitting a lot harder. But you see that not every shot is going to have that 25% bonus damage, and so we're doing 143, then 179, then back down to 143. But it does also make that melee way easier to hit, because I can charge it up from farther away, and I can just slam the enemies like that. And Melee Charge upgrades into Crushing Fists, which further improves your heavy melee distance. It doubles the melee damage bonus from 10 up to 20, and it also has a new passive, where your melee damage will restore ammo and apply a stacking bullet resist debuff on enemies. And if they reach max stacks, they will also be stunned. So this further improves your melee damage and also adds that juicy stun. Look at that. So that is very powerful. It's a fantastic item, cream of the crop if you're going for a melee build. In the Vitality category, we have Melee Lifesteal, which gives you 12% further melee damage, and it also causes your next melee attack to heal you for 100 and only 30 if you hit a non-hero. And the cooldown is twice as long for light melee hits, so it's 8 seconds for heavy melee, 16 seconds for a light melee. And if you upgrade that into Life Strike, you gain 16% melee damage, a bunch of bonus health, and the cooldown on it is halved from 8 to 4 seconds. Plus, the melee attack will apply a movement slow and heal you for 50% of the melee damage dealt, plus 160. So this is very, very helpful because that slow will make it easier to hit follow-up melee attacks, and obviously that heal is chunky, and it provides a pretty good amount of extra damage too. Very, very good item. Finally, in the Spirit category, we have Spirit Strike. When you perform a light or heavy melee against a hero, deal extra spirit damage with the attack and reduce the target's spirit resist. And this cooldown is also twice as long for light melee hits. So it'll deal 41 spirit damage, and this will actually scale with your spirit power. So the more spirit power you get, the more spirit damage you do. And also, it lowers their resistances, which is fantastic. And if you upgrade to Spirit Snatch, you gain a further 10% melee damage, and the effect is much more powerful. It's down to a 6-second cooldown, and it deals up to 83 damage now here, much higher starting value, and it'll also steal 15% spirit resist and steal 15 spirit power. What that means is it basically takes it away from the enemy and gives it to you, so you gain that 15% spirit resist when you steal it. So if I go ahead and max level my character and then use all 3 of these items, you can see that my melee damage is hitting hard. This is pretty good. 390, 400 wallops of damage every melee. That's pretty nice, but we can scale this even higher. You see, weapon damage modifiers and weapon damage resistance will also affect melee damage, but in kind of a weird way. It's not really intuitive to new players. Heck, it's not even really that intuitive to me, because there is a, definitive melee damage category, but then overall weapon damage will still partially affect it. So let me show you what I mean. I have reset my character back down to level 0 with no items, and if I go ahead and buy Glass Cannon, this will give me 80% weapon damage plus a further 29% from weapon investment. So theoretically we should be doing double damage. Let me go ahead and sell this real quick just to show you my base starting value. We're doing 122 damage with the heavy melee. But if I buy Glass Cannon, we would expect it to go up to 244, right? It's actually even higher than that. It's more than 100% extra weapon damage, but instead, it's only 189 damage, which is definitely higher, but not as high as we were expecting. It's a little strange. So you definitely can still buy these weapon damage items to further boost your melee damage, but it just won't be as effective as it states on the label. It's just really weird like that. So once we've got our core 3 melee items online, I would recommend items like Point Blank, which gives you a massive weapon damage bonus when you're in close range, as well as a movement speed penalty for the enemies, so they're easier to hit, and Hunter's Aura, which reduces their bullet resist when they are nearby. And you'll also notice that Crushing Fist reduces their resistances too, and that does also boost our melee damage, so that's very powerful. And also, since you're going to be in the front lines taking a lot of damage because you're up in their faces meleeing them, Berserker is a fantastic item to buy because it makes you deal drastically more damage. And with these items, ooh, we're starting to do some pretty good damage. Let me max out my character too. We're starting to hit for, 600 damage! 700 damage! Oh my goodness, that's crazy. There's one last item that is really helpful if you're playing a melee build and the enemies are also playing some melee builds, and that is Rebuttal. Rebuttal will reduce the parry cooldown by 2 seconds, which makes it genuinely useful for anybody in the game if you're just trying to counter melee builds, but what makes it especially potent on a melee build is that whenever you parry an enemy hero, you will heal yourself for the damage parried, and then return that damage to the target, and temporarily gain, for 6 seconds, 50% increased melee damage. That is massive. Oh my gosh. So if I punch this guy, you can see that, okay, I do 673 damage with that melee. But if I walk in here and let this guy punch me and then parry him, bam, 980, 838. Oh my goodness, that's a lot. Here, punch me again. Give me that rebuttal buff. Yeah. Your resistances are reduced. 1100 damage melee. Oh, that's insane! What are we doing here? So, yeah, this is a very powerful item, but it's only going to work if the enemies are also trying to melee you with consistency. If you're playing Abrams with a melee build, and the enemies are playing Infernus, who doesn't really melee at all once he gets to the mid and late stages of the game, he's just going to flame dash and shoot you, then Rebuttal's not ever going to proc. But if you're playing against a melee Yamato, or a melee Shiv, or a melee Calico, then it could be very helpful for boosting your damage output, and also protecting you from their damage. Speaking of other characters with melee builds, let's talk about one last technicality, and that is abilities that are considered melee attacks. There are a couple characters in the game that have such abilities, such as Calico's Leaping Slash or Bebop's Exploding Uppercut. Viscus is another great example, and it's very important to actually read the abilities that are considered melee attacks so you know what type of melee attack they are. So Puddle Punch here is considered a light melee attack, as it says in the description. It deals 120 damage, and because it's a light melee attack, it's only going to proc my Life Strike and my Spirit Snatch, but not my Crushing Fists. So punch this guy, and you see that, yep, Crushing Fists doesn't proc, and also both of these have double cooldown because it was considered a light melee attack. But once we upgrade it to tier 3, you see how it says minus 11 seconds cooldown and also now deals heavy melee damage? That means that now, Life Strike and Spirit Snatch have lower cooldowns, and Crushing Fists will apply. So punch this guy again, we do significantly more damage, and all of my abilities are working properly now. So yeah, be very careful with these abilities, make sure that you read them and build accordingly for them. You don't want to accidentally get Crushing Fists if your ability is only a light attack and not a heavy attack. But anyways, that's going to do it for this video. There are a lot of damage types in Deadlock, and it's important to know how to scale them appropriately so you can dominate your foes on the battlefield. If you found this video to be helpful, then of course make sure to like and subscribe. It really helps out the channel a ton, and it helps you stay up to date on all my latest videos. And again, check the guides playlist in the description down below if you want more educational content. But yeah, with all that being said, thank you guys for watching. I will see you all next time. Peace out.